Hi everyone, Alon Lits here, the CEO of October Health. I'm really excited to be here for another episode of Pressure Point. Today I have Navasha Chetty with me. Really excited to have a conversation with me about the role that leadership can take in fostering a positive environment for employee mental well-being. So there's a lot to unpack, so we'll get straight into it. So hi Navasha, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. Absolute pleasure being here with you today.
Awesome. So always like to start with a bit of your background. You know, I know you're sitting here today as the head of HR for the JSE, but there was a journey to get here. So let's take everyone back.
Okay, great. Sure. I guess my career started off very early in life. Grew up in Durban, hometown, Amzinto, one street town, sugarcane fields. One school in the town. Went to study at UKZN, studied industrial psychology. Post that, got my first job. Actually, remember that quite clearly at a textile industry.
Okay.
The one thing that stuck out for me was I had to actually retrench myself.
Oh, wow.
And other people.
Quite a first job.
Absolutely. So that's why it sticks out like a sore thumb. But yeah, post that, had quite a few stints in many organizations. Worked at APSA for around 8 years. Had some exposure on the capital market side. I supported businesses in coverage, the trading floor, research. So interesting experience in financial services. Then moved on to insurance. Had a stint there as well for around 8 years. 8 years seems to be a thing for me. Yeah, my
Not
number.
the 7-year itch for you.
It's not a 7-year itch. It looks like an 8-year itch. And had a stint in insurance. Amazing. Worked at Liberty during that time and headed up HR for corporate functions and business development. Lots of work in the Africa space. I love working on the continent. The people in Africa are amazing, and there's some amazing work still to be done. Yeah. And then I joined the JSE. So it's been around 4 to 5 months now. And trying to settle in. Still early days, but going good. Thanks.
Awesome. So clearly some of SA's top brands and the continent's top brands behind you. Maybe before we get into the topic, I think what's interesting, and you've got a background in financial services and insurance. Now, obviously, leading HR for the largest stock exchange on the continent. HR's role is a business partner, right? So it's important for you to understand what happens within the business so you can support the various leaders and the employees in an organization. So how do you go about doing that in different organizations?
Yeah, so that's quite interesting. I think I've been around the block quite a bit. So for me, it's really about drawing from past experiences. And the one thing I can really say hand on heart in an HR role is building relationships. I think that's so important. It's really getting to know the business, understand what makes the business tick, understand some of the people challenges that leaders are faced with, and really partner with leaders to drive their strategic intent through the people agenda. So for me, that is like ACE comes out, as top notch in terms of that business partnering with leaders. Yeah.
So it's relationships, right? And I think
absolutely. You can have all of the qualifications, all of the experience, but if you really don't understand human beings at the core and building those relationships, what makes them tick, and then how you can support them through their journey.
So I think a great segue from your point around the importance of relationship in your role as an HRBP and understanding the organization, in empowering your business partners across an organization for success, is the importance of relationships. And I think, it's such an important point, and I think it lends itself to this discussion of leadership, because what do we see with leaders? A lot of things that leaders get wrong is the inability to connect on a personal level and build relationships with their team members. So if you reflect on your journey, if you reflect on what makes great leaders, where you see leaders misstep, do you see relationships playing a role in that journey or the success or failure of leaders?
Yeah. So thanks for the question. I think it's such a critical one, specifically around the role leaders have to play in the environments that we operate in at the moment. Relationship building is key. And I think if you just take the role of a leader, they have strategic imperatives that they need to land in terms of business success, driving profitability. But in order to drive profitability, you've got to have this human touch, or you have to build relationships with people to drive people to reach the objectives that they need to land. I mean, KPIs are KPIs on a piece of paper, but how do you get to connect the human being to what they want to intrinsically do or make a difference? I mean, for me, I think every leader wants to make a difference. They want to drive success. And in order to drive success, you have to tap into human nature, right? Because as human beings, we are brought up to be successful, to drive success, and we want to succeed at everything that we do, right? So how do you connect with individuals at that level to say, actually, it's not only about your KPIs, but what is your innate need to deliver? What is your innate need to drive success? Let's work with that, build that relationship, understand what you are driving, understand what the business is driving, and how do we bring those two together to drive one common objective? So, yeah.
So it's about empowering individuals and alignment and building that bond to kind of move forward together.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's about getting to know the person at heart, right? I mean, every leader has, we talk about this relationship building. In building a relationship is really about getting to know people and what drive people or what drives the leader. And there is this connection with individuals at the end of the day, your background, where you come from, how you grew up. And once you tap into what drives that person, you build this relationship to actually want to help the person succeed. So as an HR business partner, it's not only a personal agenda, but it's the combined agenda of driving business success, but also driving individual success in what the person wants to achieve for themselves.
That makes so much sense. And in some ways, it's kind of obvious when you say it, but at the same time, it's an obvious mistake or a common mistake that leaders make, or something that people overlook because you get so caught up in the day-to-day, so caught up in the deliverables.
Yes.
But I want to take a step back, because you made a point, or you touched on a point around, this tumultuous environment that we're finding ourselves in. And I think it started in 2020 with COVID, but it hasn't stopped, right? The world is different. It's evolving at a pace that it never has before. And that makes the macro environment that employees are faced with on a daily basis that much more difficult to navigate. Oh. And I think the role of a leader that much more important in supporting employees. So, what are some, practical steps that leaders can take to support employees in this world, or set them up for success, or build those relationships, given that it's, more difficult today than it was, a couple of years ago?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's quite an interesting one. I mean, post-COVID, it feels, we talk about the great reset, the great resignation. Really, the world of work has evolved. And the way we did things to the way we do things now is completely shifted. I mean, for myself personally, if I can just talk about, pre-COVID, I didn't drop my kids off at school. I didn't exercise. I didn't go to the gym. I just didn't have the time to do it, because focusing on work and what you need to land, productivity, all of those things, it's the grind, basically. And with the way things have moved now, post-COVID, people don't want to give up those things. I certainly don't want to give up the gains of that period. And I think a lot of leaders struggle with managing that going forward. We don't have a set manual for leadership post-COVID, right? And a lot of leaders struggle to navigate this new world of work. I mean, we've got hybrid working now as well, where leaders actually don't know how to manage employees through a hybrid environment. The human connection is lost. So leaders really need support. And a lot of the time, I think there's an opportunity for HR to step up. I think I've done my best work during COVID, especially from an employee well-being perspective. Suddenly you see across the globe, there's a huge focus on employee well-being, mental well-being. And it's a lot of the time leaders struggle with understanding the importance of employee well-being. And you will see as part of the HR strategy, many companies across the globe have put employee well-being as a key tenet of their strategy going forward, which was never the case before. And now suddenly, many organizations are actually forced to do it. They don't have a choice. If I look at our organization at the JSC, part of the work we're doing now is focusing on employee well-being, but also supporting our leaders understanding mental well-being, what it means to have conversations with employees. If you take South Africa at the moment, in terms of the challenges we're faced with, times are tough. Load shedding, economic downtime, inflation, all of those type of things impact our employees. They walk in the door and we expect them to be these perfect employees, but they actually bring the burdens of the workplace, of their homes into the workplace. And I think it's important for leaders to have those conversations with employees around understanding their personal needs, understanding what drives them, understanding the challenges they're faced with, but also giving them the right support. I think previously leaders were not equipped to support employees along this journey. If you think about it now, leaders in terms of emotional intelligence, it plays a critical factor in how they show up. I think empathy and care is part of the new superpower of leaders going forward. I think if you don't have that as leaders, then you struggle because there's so much the textbook or theory can teach you around leadership, but you need to tap into your empathy and care side. It's something that comes innately to us as human beings. And a lot of the time, people don't want to go there because they see leadership as clinical, and in fact, it's not.
So how do you change those behaviors? Because, I mean, I think as you've said, maybe, I don't know, I think, life within, it's always been tough, right? But the environment, the macro environment, both South Africa and globally, seems to be getting tougher, right? And, maybe these were things that you could avoid. Or one of the benefits of COVID, and I think a point that you made so well, is that all of a sudden employee well-being is front and center. So how do you actually equip managers that have never really been forced to have these conversations before? How do you equip them with the skills that they need to have these conversations? Where does an organization start? If someone's listening, they're thinking about, that resonates. I need to get that right in my organization. How do organizations think about implementing that type of change?
Yeah. So I think as organizations, we're not alone in this. And that's the one thing we need to understand, that there is a support structure out there within the context that we operate in. So, for example, partner with key suppliers in the industry around wellness. The one thing I can tell you is, just based on my previous experience, mental well-being was one of the key things we struggled with as an organization, given all of these challenges that people have. So make sure you have the right support structure in place. So whoever your wellness service providers are, tap into them. Run workshops for line leaders around mental well-being, managing staff through mental well-being. Make sure that you upskill leaders around emotional intelligence, around empathy and care. How does it look like for a leader to show up? Running these type of programs and empowering leaders for them to understand they're not in this alone and they don't have to have all the answers. It's okay not to have the answers, and understand that you're going to have to explore and provide the support to staff. But in order to be able to do that as a leader, use the people around you to empower yourself with the right skills to be able to do that.
I think that's super practical and valuable. I think also goes back to your earlier point about relationship, right? Because if you've built that relationship with your employee, then hopefully there'll be a level of honesty in the conversation. And even as a leader, if you're not equipped to have that conversation or necessarily help the individual guide them through whatever the challenge is, you can then, to your point again, refer them to the right support network that they have available. So I think that's an important kind of point to demystify for leaders, that they don't have to solve it for themselves.
Yeah.
Right? They don't have to be the subject matter expert on everything or every challenge that employees are dealing with.
Yeah, absolutely. If I can just maybe use October Health as an example, mental well-being is such a key component of our wellness strategy at the moment. And you find that employee needs have shifted. It's not the way it was in the past. Mental well-being is suddenly very topical. It's something that people struggle with in terms of their everyday challenges, be it kids or personal circumstances, if you're going through a divorce or whatever it is. Sometimes you actually don't want to talk to people around you. And what we found at the JSC is that employees actually utilize October Health in terms of that support. So, for example, I've personally logged on myself. I have the app on my phone. Extremely useful. I mean, at night, if I'm at bed, it's 9 p.m. and I actually have this need around struggling with an ADHD son, I would log on to a forest session and listen to some of the tools in my own time when I'm able to have my own downtime. So I think it's important also to let leaders know that there are these mechanisms available, and it's actually extremely useful in supporting your employee.
And it's about empowering the individual, right?
Yes.
It's giving them access to tools to problem solve in a safe way as well. To your point, not everyone is comfortable sharing in the work environment, but through the infrastructure that you put in place, you're giving employees access to solutions to better support them through the challenges that they're dealing with.
Absolutely.
And that's so important. I think, the conversation around mental well-being, the conversation around a high-performing culture, which we know you have at the JSC, sometimes those two things feel, at odds with one another, because to your earlier point, like managers are, focused on profitability, they're focused on results and delivering. And then, with that, there is a demand on employees that comes with it. So how do you get that balance right? How do you ensure that you can maintain that high-performing culture, that managers can, ask for accountability and deliver deliverables from staff, but still do so in a supportive environment?
Yeah. So I think what's important in working in a highly pressurized environment is that you organize and plan yourself as a leader. And the thing is, we need to acknowledge that employees are human beings. We are fallible. We make mistakes. It's important as a leader to actually understand that these mistakes are fine, but it's how you pick yourself up and move on, and how do you support yourself or your team through the mistakes that they make along the journey of pressure. So I think it's important for leaders to understand that as much as there is productivity that they need to drive and high performance, at the same time, you need to find a balance where you understand your employee needs and the challenges they are faced with, and then how do you help them along the performance journey. I think productivity is something that many organizations drive. High performance is something that many organizations drive. But at the same time, we have shifted in the way we see high performance and the way we see productivity. The one thing I do want to call out is culture. So we need to create an environment that is conducive in terms of culture. So people understanding that there are goals that need to be delivered or, goals that need to be landed. But at the same time, it's how you land those goals that's sustainable, that it does not destroy the individual and it does not destroy the environment, does not destroy the organization, but ensure that you do it in a sustainable manner when you come out all successful at the end of the day.
Yeah, so I think that's such a powerful point around, I think we focus often on the what, right? But you made this really important distinction between the how we do things. And again, I think that's something which leaders often overlook, that organizations overlook. And it's so important, the how, right? Are people being respectful? Are they, treating people fairly? All those things which, need to happen even in a high-performing culture. So how do you get the how right from the culture perspective? How do you, it's easy, again, KPIs, deliverables, they're very measurable, but sometimes these softer cultural elements are harder to measure. Right? How do you celebrate that and drive the right type of culture from a how perspective within the organization?
Yeah. So I think that is so important. If you think about culture and some of the work that we started to do at the JSC around culture, we've launched a program called the Archaeology of Culture, which is really exciting because
sounds exciting.
Yeah, I'm really chuffed about it. And I think if we just think about the word archaeology, it talks about, an archaeological dig or site where you find these treasure troves, and it tells you how people lived. It tells you things about people in terms of their practices, their values, their behaviors, how they've shown up in societies. And I guess the thing that triggered the idea around it was 2 years ago, I traveled to Mexico. It was a town called Tulum, around the Mayan people. And it was amazing to see how they had lived and worked, and their cultural norms and behavior established. So at the JSC, what we've looked at is, if you take Africa as a continent, one of the things that really resonates with people is around storytelling. So how do we pass the legacies of our ancestors going forward? And it's around telling stories of the past. And in telling those stories, you create a sense of belonging with people. So at the JSC, we're looking at what's the archaeology of the JSC? What are the stories of the JSC that drive culture? It's the sense of belonging. If you think about the JSC and where it started in Diagonal Street, and if you actually visit the building now, they have unbelievable artifacts around the JSC and how trading took place. And we want to actually get people to tell those stories. Because if you think about what COVID has done, it has robbed us of our sense of belonging. So through culture, we want to create the sense of belonging, the sense of family, that people feel that this is home, this is safe. I can live, I can behave in a way that's conducive to driving a sustainable culture and a productive culture.
Yeah, I love that. I think it goes to your earlier points around alignment. It goes to the word belonging, right? I mean, you're part of something that's bigger than you are, right? And it's got this rich history, which is so critical to, trade across the continent, right? And the whole African continent, the economy is really driven by the history of the organization.
Absolutely.
So it's so powerful to help people feel part of something that's larger. So, I mean, practically, is that something that you incorporate into your onboarding? Is that something that you kind of celebrate across the organization on a regular basis?
Yeah, so we've just started that journey, and what we're doing, and I think this is what COVID has taught us, is that to build culture, you need to start at the bottom. And if you take an organization's strategy, you can't land a strategy without the culture. Actually, your strategy is dead in the water without the people having the sense of belonging, their hearts and minds really one, and understanding what they do and why they need to do it. So it's a sense of purpose that you want to create with people. I mean, we are part of the top 20 exchanges in the world. We are number one in Africa. So we have a huge legacy that we have within the South African context, but also within a global context. And I think it's so important through that to understand and build a culture from the bottom. So normally you kind of get leaders driving culture from the top. What COVID has taught us is actually hear the voices of the people, understand what people want, understand the sense of belonging that people want to create in this organization. So it's building on some of the great work that's been there, but also looking at something amazing going forward. And I think it's one of our execs calls it, what's the snazzy, new, sexy culture that we want to create? That people actually crave to come to work. They want the sense of, I'm safe, I'm at home. I actually work in a sense of community where I drive a mission. I mean, if you go to NASA, the person will tell you that is cleaning the floors. I actually take people to the moon. So that's what we want to do, is every person that lives and works at the JSC to be able to say, I drive capital markets in the South African context.
I mean, that's so powerful. And so how do you create those forums, on a bottoms up, how do you get employees engaged, and, how do you hear them, right? How do you listen to them?
Yeah, so we're running focus groups, and we've just come out of a last round last week where we have put our employees into groups, and we're really talking about what makes sense for you. What is the sense of culture that you want to create? What is important for you? What are the values that drive you? What are the behaviors that drive you? What is it that you want to see in leaders that drives the culture? So it's not about leaders telling employees, this is the culture, but it's the employees telling us what is the culture that they want to create for the sense of community within the JSC. So through that, those focus groups, we're hearing the voices of people across the board, all levels, and then through that, a co-creation with our leaders to say, this is the future of the JSC on the continent, in the globe, and this is how we see ourselves showing up, driving capital markets across the world.
It's an exciting turning point for the organization, and maybe bring it back to where we started around the role of leadership. Clearly, you're doing something right, that people go into these conversations and they can be open and they can share. And what do you think it is that people are willing to kind of open up and be, honest about what they want from a culture perspective?
I guess through past experience, a lot of the time leaders kind of have a view of how they see the world and how they see culture. And then you have employees on the other end of the spectrum having a different view of the world and the different view of the culture. So hearing the voices of people, it's actually saying, you're important. Your voice is important. Help us. We don't have the answers as leaders. And we want to listen to the voices of people who are on the ground, who know what's going on. Actually, if you really want a solution, go to people and they'll tell you how to fix things. And we're saying we don't have the answers to build a sustainable culture. You actually have the answers. Tell us how to fix this. Tell us how to build.
So I think that's, such a powerful point, because generally, right, we think leaders need to have the answer, right? But what you've said, and it makes, again, it just is so sensical in that, well, a leader's role here is actually to go to their teams and say, we don't have the answers. We want you to tell us what the answer looks like, right? And that's the role that leadership are taking. It's not this role of kind of coming there and solving the problems. It's actually just empowering everyone else around them and giving them the platform to define that future together.
Yeah.
And I think, again, it's so powerful and so actually it's an easy thing to implement. But again, I think something which organizations don't do, because it's not obvious, right? It's maybe obvious if you hear it or you see other organizations do it, but it's not obvious if you haven't done it before.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I guess maybe just we're closing out from, going back to where we started around leadership and mental well-being. How do you sustain this moving forward, right? And again, going back to this point that we've touched on, let's assume we get the new JSC culture right, which is going to be driven from where you came from, but with a new flavor of where you need to go and kind of adapting to this new world that we find ourselves in. How do you kind of continue to drive this balance, our performance of respecting employee well-being, giving employees the ability to, have flexibility in their day-to-day in a remote environment? How do you get that sustainable journey right from here? And what role leadership need to play going forward?
Yeah, I think it's a continuous journey. And as the world evolves, we're going to see things change. I guess, when you look at what's happening around you, the one thing you cannot ignore is the environmental factors. If you think about what's happening with us around right now, the geopolitical environment, all of the challenges around climate change, etc., this shifts the conversation all the time. So you constantly have to be aware of your environment. What are the drivers from a business strategy point of view? What are the needs from a business point of view? And then always factor that in driving your thinking around mental well-being. I mean, next year, who knows what will transpire across the globe, right? Be it climate change, which is a huge driver at the moment, and we would have seen that come out of the World Economic Forum as well. Sustainability is a big topic, and for the JSC, it is a big topic as well. how do we leave this world a better place? How do we make a difference? We have a bigger role to play as human beings in society. We have a bigger role to play as corporates, and how are we supporting leaving the continent in a better place for our kids and their future. So it's about now having those conversations with our employees and helping them understand there's a bigger purpose beside the JSE, beside South Africa. There's a bigger purpose across the globe. What's the footprint that you want to leave behind, and how do we help them drive that agenda going forward?
Awesome. So I think there's a lot there. I think the first piece for me and the takeaway there is that the only constant is change, right? And if you've got this rigid mindset where you do all this work and now it's done and it's going to be perfect moving forward, that's not going to set you up for success. You've got to embrace the ambiguity. You've got to embrace the change and constantly evolve as that macro environment evolves, and you've got to adapt with it. I think the next important piece that you make there is that it goes back to this point around the bigger picture, right, and alignment. And it's not just about the business deliverables, right, or maybe it is, because a business deliverable is about the broader environment or the broader community. It's not just about the bottom line of the company. It's thinking more broadly and ensuring that everyone feels that alignment to a bigger mission, and you're part of a bigger story, and ultimately something we've spoken about before, a legacy that the organization and individuals within the organization can leave behind.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, thanks so much. I think we're at time. Any closing thoughts from you before we wrap it up?
I guess thank you for having me. It's really been an absolute pleasure having a chat with you, discussing some of the pertinent topics that impact us as corporates. And I guess for me, my ask is for everybody, whatever role you're in whatever corporate you're in, make a difference. It's about time we all have an impact in society.
Thank you. And I think on the perfect note to end, everyone make a difference. And, there was so much there that hopefully you've written down notes, but the two biggest takeaways for me is just the one around the importance of the how, not only the what within an organization from a cultural perspective. And the other big one is just this, leadership, and going back to our topic around the role that leadership can play, is that leadership don't need to feel like they're the ones who need to solve everything themselves. Part of solving a problem is giving a platform to others and empowering those around you. And I think it goes back to making a difference and hopefully leaving a legacy. So with that, thanks so much. Really loved that conversation.
Thank you. Thanks, Alon.
Thank you.